Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am thrilled to have you here, except for the couple of you I'm not. Uh, my name's Chris. I'm a bookseller here at Boswell. Oodles of introducing and thanking here to do, so bear with me as I do it. But first of all, I want to say many, many thanks to our pals at Celtic Milwaukee. Say hi, Patrick. All right. Thanks. I want to thank them as always for co-sponsoring this evening's event. We've got some great events coming up on the horizon with them. One I do want to mention, actor, filmmaker, and now about to be novelist Edward Burns is going to be up the street at the Downer Theater at the end of September. There's more info on our website. We got a couple big collaborations for next year coming up too, so keep an eye on our website for those, okay? So thanks to them. I also want to thank our conversation partner tonight, José Lanterns. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. And thank you preemptively for the fabulous conversationalizing you're going to do. Of course, UW Professor Emerita of Irish Lit Culture and many other things. And the main person to thank and welcome and introduce here is Kevin Barry, author of the story collections, of collections such as, but not inclusive, Dark Lies the Island and That Old Country Music. He's also author of novels such as Nightboat to Tangier and Beetlebone and City of Bohane. And he is here tonight with his latest novel, The Heart in Winter. I absolutely love this book. So do lots and lots of people. Raves all over the place. In fact, I think the bookmarks, LitHub Bookmarks just named it, just noted that it was like last week's most raved about book. So all right. So some words used in various review publications about The Heart in Winter include gritty, funny, romantic, stunning, profane, propulsive, and profound, dazzling, inspiring, fabulous, rip-roaring, thrilling, rollicking, vulgar, electrifying, lyrical, magnificent, and sublime. I love this book. I think you're going to love it as well. Please give Kevin Barry a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was a lovely introduction, and thanks to Chris and to Daniel and to everyone at this amazing store, which is my first visit here and my first visit to Milwaukee. So thanks for coming out. It's lovely to see you all this evening. I'm going to talk about this new book and whatever else with Jose shortly, but I'm going to do a short reading at the start for maybe 10 minutes or so. We're going to Butte, Montana in 1891. 10 years earlier, it had been a little mining camp, a few hundred people there, but now there's suddenly a city of 30,000 people because North America is being electrified and there's a rush on copper, and copper miners are coming from all over the world. Now, by coincidence, at this time, the copper mines in County Cork in the west of Ireland have just played out. So all the miners have upped sticks and moved en masse to Butte, Montana. In 1891, there are 30,000 people in Butte. 10,000 of them are crazy Irishmen losing the run of themselves. They're making a lot of money. They're doing filthy, hard, dangerous work. They're all dead by 40. The city is kind of wild. It's just bars and brothels and dope houses, and anything goes in Butte. This is our elegant setting for the Heart in Winter. It's a love story, and our lovers are a young man called Tom Rourke, who we'll meet in a moment, and a young woman called Polly Gillespie. Tom Rourke is 29 years old, and he's from County Cork. He's been in Butte for a few years. He's not a copper miner. He's a disgrace and a disaster of a young man. He's kind of a poet, kind of a ballad maker, kind of wants to be an outlaw of some kind. He writes letters for the miners when they're looking for wives, mail order brides from back home and from back east. He's falling around the town all the time between bars and brothels and dope houses. He's a doper, a drinker, always in trouble. As we meet him in these early pages, he's been on a lurch all over the town. He's been on a pub crawl. Crazy things have been happening. He's been in a fight. He's been in a dope house. He's been to a brothel twice. He's lost his faith in God. He has found his faith in God again. And it's still only page 11 of the book. Every premises and bar and establishment named in the book existed in Butte, Montana in the 1890s. Tom Rourke looked in at the Board of Trade again. He took a slow, recuperative bottle of stout. He was dissatisfied with the ambience. Too many Irish. There were by now 10,000 Hibernian to the town, and they had the place fucking destroyed. A fellow Corkman, drinking at his westerly elbow, leaned in with an accent from the rim of Bantry originally. Tom, did you hear about Two-Bit Billy? Shot his own toes off, Tom Rourke recited, at the Alley Cat bar. Not the way I heard it, Tom. It happened at the Big Stope bar. I've seen eyewitnesses describing. Two-Bit barred out of the Alley Cat since March. He's been drinking with the Finns down at the Helsinki bar. And when did that all start? March, Tom. They was drinking for St. Uro, the bastard what chased the grasshoppers out of Finland. And Two-Bit fell in. Two-Bit fell in. The man's companionable. And where did the grasshoppers head to? We're getting off the track of it, Tom. Was it the right or the left toes he shot off the way you heard it? Does it really matter, friend? All I'm saying is you're an honest working man stood there trying to have a peaceful drink and there's toes all over the fucking floor. That's letting the place down something shocking and I don't care what bar. Tom Rourke looked in at the Southern Hotel. He looked in at the cesspool. He gave a broad berth to the Bucket of Blood saloon, which was for newspapermen and touristic types only, was his opinion. He denied himself again the line cribs, though he considered briefly another proposal of marriage to Greta of Bavaria at the Black Feather crib. It was by now 3 a.m. He drank and smoked and moved his feet. Then the usual black haze descended. Then the music all stopped. He found himself aloft suddenly. He was at an elevation. He was upon the air. He was carried from the open all-night bar and deposited arsewards to the street. He crawled the breadth of the street on all fours. There was very little dignity to it. He rose with grave uncertainty and stumbled away into the night, and he carried yet the great burden of youth. He lost his faith in God again around 4:30 a.m. Now he believed in everything else instead. He believed in spells and enchantments. He believed for sure he could put a spell on this horse. He clamped one eye shut to keep her in focus, but she danced about madly before him, a nervous animal of golden aura. It was mostly Palomino in her. She kicked at the frozen hard ground, and a petulance of tiny stars flew up in sparks. Go handy, he said, wouldn't you? My head is fucking opening here. The moon was near and pale at 3/4. It showed over the east ridge wanly. There was a witching in its blue milky light. The horse kicked and whined and her eyes flared with violence. No call for that business, he said. He tried to get on his feet for a stance of authority, but failed and slid the wall of some old shanty onto the bone of his butt again. Jesus, the cold will go through you these nights. He looked up at the horse, and the horse looked down at him. She was beautiful and high-bred, and her every muscle shone. Who the fuck owns you anyway, he said. The horse quieted at this and relaxed her head to one side and stared at him as if she was certain now she had seen him before but couldn't place him. Tom Rourke, he said. The horse stilled herself utterly and fixed the lashes of a long stare on him, and he was bound. There was wretched pain in her someplace, he saw. He rose and wavered on woozy legs. He opened a hand to the horse. She flinched a little and stepped back, but only by a few dancing steps. They were flirting now. He felt he might need a horse one day soon. She lowered her stare again, and he put a hand before her face and felt her hot, sick breath on his palm and locked onto her lash-wide stare. Now closer, he said, and he began very tunelessly to sing, working out the words as he went. Oh, Palomino, Palomino, sing a song for me. Palomino, Sweet Palomino, nothing comes for free. No fall, he said. And at that, the horse buckled onto her knees as if gunshot and rolled onto her side and onto her spine and kicked at the air and showed her crazy teeth, and the pain was no more, or at least not so she could feel it. I'll be seeing you, he said. He was on Wyoming Street again in the pre-dawn dim. He was a bit drunk still and pretended not to be. He was also a little high. His member was somewhat on fire. The rooftops of Dublin Gulch leaned into each other as though to confide. The prospect of death was a glamorous comfort, but would not hold for long. Oh, this brick and mud Calvary, my Wyoming Street. All around him, the inanimate enlivened. There were faces recessed in the shanty walls. He was rattled at this hour, certainly. He would never go out of an evening no more, but left alone at night, he grew afraid of the dark. Vows, resolutions. He was 29 years to heaven and must never feel this old again. A breath of dawn smoke. Park and Broadway. The winter it came slowly west. He spoke to God again as he stood at that section and looked down on the world. Can we see him there yet? He told God that he was very proud of him. Now, Tom Rourke's life is about to take a sudden turn. The very next morning, he has a day job at a local photographic studio that's just opened to take portraits of all the miners so they can send them back to Ireland and Poland and Croatia and wherever they come from. So Captain Harrington, a mining boss, comes in, an older, very religious Cork man, also an Irishman, and he has a new young bride, Polly Gillespie. They've just got married the day before. They're having their matrimonial portrait made. But Tom and Polly lock eyes on each other, and that's all she wrote. They both realize this is the great love and this is the great drama in our lives, and we've got to follow it wherever it's going to go. It's a hard life in Butte, Montana in the 1890s, and you have to kind of make your fun wherever you can find it, you know? And it's like that great old Italian saying that sex is the poor man's opera. You know, yeah, you have to make your fun wherever it is to be had. Tom and Polly are quickly having their fun and their theatrics. When her husband, the mine captain, goes out on the night shift, Tom and Polly take off around town. And one night they walk a little further out of town. They know things are coming to a moment where they're going to have to do something. In the second chapter of the book where we are now, we're with Polly Gillespie's point of view. Now, in those times, you could strike west along Granite Street and just keep going and find yourself in the edges of the forest pretty quick, even on foot. And for the first time that night, they walked right out of town. It was like they were on a practice run. She knew they were both thinking it without even saying it. What if we kept going? What if we were to run and never once look back? They were wrapped up in winter coats, but feeling the cold all the same. It was a good, painful cold that made you feel truly alive at your personal extremities. And the further they climbed into the wood, the more the pressure of their situation seemed to ease off. A little river moved up there, ran in silver through the trees, made a spooky night music. There were ruins of shacks, old hunting shacks and claim shacks that had never paid out, fall down premises hanging loose, planks jutting out like broken elbows, holes in the roofs, night birds that were eerie types, but she did not know the names of birds in particular. It was said there was vagrants and runaways up there too, but they didn't meet nobody for a while, didn't hear or see nobody, but somehow they were expecting it. And soon enough, they saw a lamp burning up ahead in the dark of night, and they were drawn to it, moth-like, even though they were a little bit afraid. Turned out it was a dude named of Ding Dong. Ding Dong was so called on account of he'd been the bellhop at the Southern Hotel many a lonesome moon ago, was how he put it, but had turned silly on account of not sleeping at all, and was not fit for the company of humankind no more. Simple as that. Fallen asleep felt to Ding Dong like drowning, he said. So he just quit it all and lived in the wood ever since. Didn't sleep and didn't have to. And there they found him sat outside an old shack he'd fixed up somewhat. And tell you what, he looked content enough in his way. From the trees, he'd hung some old pans that he'd hit with a stick now and again to make a rough music and percussion out of, but he didn't seem all that bad in terms of silly. Not saying you could walk the man into a bank and open up an account. But they sat with the dude Ding Dong an hour or so and passed the bottle around, and it was companionable. Ding Dong said he could read messages in the sky and in fires. He said he could have an agitated guess at what was coming down the line for folks. You said agitated, said Polly Gillespie, 'cause that's how it feels. He cried and slapped his hands together and got all crinkled up laughing. Tell me more, she said. And Ding Dong said, now look there are folks who get certain intimations about what they need to do in their lives. They can feel these intimations like stirrings of the blood, and boy, it's mysterious, he said. They just get drawn to acting out in certain crazy ways, like they're acting out under the instruction of the moon and tides. It feels like there ain't no plan or design to it, but there is. You just got to learn how to read it right. And whatever intimation you get about your life, you got to follow it through, because elsewise nothing's going to make sense ever again. I got intimations coming out the ears, said Polly Gillespie. And Ding Dong, he turned to them both all somber then, and he said, now look up yonder. Look up at yonder moon, he said. You may need to look for a while, he said. Look real hard, fall into it, he said. Fall into the spell of the moon. Now tell me, can you see fires on it? Can you see fires on the moon? And there she was, with Tom Rourke, hand in hand in terrible love, in the dead of night in the forest deep, looking up at the sky. And yes, sir, absolutely, they could see fires on the moon. Now that's a sure tell sign, Ding Dong said, that it's come to a time in your lives you need to act. And the dude Ding Dong spoke with this like weird authority. The little river was moving ice already. Long picks of it gleamed like knives in the dark. They walked on and further on. It was such a clear night and all the stars were out. It was very cold. They sat together in the wood, all huddled up in their coats, and shivered, and they were miserable in love, and they held on to each other for a long time out of the need. And they could hear each other breathing. There is no decision, said Tom Rourke. We've just got to be together. And she didn't have to tell him he was right about that. We'll put together a stake, he said, and get ourselves to San Francisco, and no one will find us out there for sure. It's a whole sea of humanity. They put down their coats then and wrapped up in them and slept like the hallowed dead in the cold, cold mountain air. Thanks.
That was wonderful. Is it on?
I'm on.
Is it on now? Yeah.
You're...
Okay. Yeah. No. Wonderful reading, and it's a wonderful book. It's the language really grabs you. You can't put it down once you start reading it. And it's also very funny that the judgy horse, I think, is the Palomino is really, really, really special. So you are originally from Limerick.
Yeah.
You live in Sligo.
Yeah.
And a lot of your short stories are sort of set in that general area of the world, right? There's very often small town, Midlands, Ireland, Limerick, Cork.
For sure. Yeah.
By and large, I'm not, the novels, interestingly, go in all sorts of different directions, don't they? There's City of Bohane, which is, I suppose, in that general region, except that it's completely transformed because it's a strange
future city.
Future. And then Nightboat to Tangier, of course, is set in Algiers, in Spain, sort of the corridor to North Africa.
Yeah.
And then here we are in Butte, Montana, in 1891. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, what takes you to these particular
Well,
places outside of your,
Yeah.
you know,
a
origins.
native diaspora is a wonderful thing for a writer, you know. We can put our characters anywhere, and it's believable because Irish people have always been economic migrants and have always traveled around the world looking for work. This is my seventh book of fiction now, but it was the first one I attempted in many years ago in 1999. I was 29 years old myself at the time, not coincidentally, same age as Tom Rourke. And I was a journalist. I was working as a freelance journalist in Cork City in Ireland. And I had one of those classic kind of 29-year-old good hard chats with myself. I said, young man, it's time to write that novel, you know? So I wrote a load of articles and saved up enough money to have 3 months to go and write a novel somewhere. And I bought a little caravan and put it on a beach on the Cork coast in West Cork. And I got down there and I opened my notebooks and I had nothing. I had no idea what I was going to write a novel about until I was on this long, kind of very fraught, worried walk in the Cork Mountains, in the Caha Mountains in West Cork, thinking, what the hell am I going to write a piece of fiction about? And I came across the abandoned copper mines there. I went, okay, that's interesting, and started to research them a little bit and discovered this story about all the Cork miners having moved to Butte, Montana. And I immediately thought, I have a Western with Cork accents. I'm in. I can do this one, you know. And I'd always loved Westerns since being a tiny kid. And I said, all I have to do really now is get to Butte, Montana. So that was my first trip to the United States, was in October 99. I flew to Seattle and got on a Greyhound bus for about 17 and a half hours. And I have to say that every glorious nut job in the Pacific Northwest was on the Montana bus. And I had a ball. And like when you get to Butte, it's very proud of its Irish heritage. And if you show up with an actual Irish accent, you're very quickly embraced into the bosom of the town, you know. And they were so kind and really nice people, and brought me around for a week and fed me and brought me drinking and introduced me to amazing librarians and opened up these archives. And I had letters from the 1890s that Cork miners had sent back home. I had amazing stuff about the bars and the brothels and the dope houses. There was a lady called Norma Jean I was introduced to, and she was the madam at the last operating brothel in Butte, and she had just closed down. It had been going since the 1880s, and she had closed in the late 90s. And she said, "It's been a long shift," was how she put it. And she was reopening it as a brothel museum, and she brought me in, and they had dug out the basement, and the original cribs where the girls had worked were there. It's heartbreaking, these tiny little spaces. And she showed me an old advertising sign they had found from inside the brothel, which was the services available, the tricks written in Irish, because a lot of the miners didn't have any English. West Cork at that point was mostly an Irish speaking area. So I knew I had brilliant material for a novel here, you know. And I went back to Cork and I wrote something like 120,000 words, and it never came to life for me. I didn't have the characters yet, and they took a long, long time to emerge from the mist. And I completely forgot about it for a long time, this book.
That's amazing. Yeah. So, but it's interesting that you did go to Butte.
Yeah.
And
I did. And I kind of, even as I was making that first attempt at the novel, I knew I didn't have the skill I needed to write it yet. Often I think in a fiction writing career, when writers are starting out, ambition and ability aren't in perfect balance, you know. Very often you're trying to write books that you're years away from, or maybe decades away from. And I managed to write 6 other books, and we got to kind of late 21, late in the pandemic, and I was shopping around in my subconscious for the next novel, you know. And I was walking in the woods in County Sligo one day, and I was saying to myself, if you're in the woods, you're in a Western. All you need is a little bit of imagination. And I saw him. Just in my mind's eye, I saw a vision of a young couple, a man and a woman, riding double on a horse. And I said, if they're riding double, they're in trouble. They're trying to get away from someplace. And then very quickly on the foot of that thought, I said, what if it's Butte, Montana in 1891? I know that place. I have all that research done. And I knew at once they were going to be called Tom and Polly. They were runaway lovers. And I had their whole stage set. And then I wrote it pretty quickly in about 10 months. And it was, I think it's probably the most fun I've had in my writing career. Westerns are fun.
You can tell when you're reading it that you had,
Yeah.
you can almost feel that you had fun
Yeah.
writing it.
I was
yeah.
leaping out of bed in the morning to go to my desk. And this is not the usual practice, you know. I was really kind of what I did. I mean, one thing you do get from experience of writing, and I've been 20 years writing fiction now as my main full-time job. You get more economical with your time. And I said, I'll give this 2 weeks. I'll write him for a week and I'll write her for a week, and I'll see if there's any flow in it. I'll see if there's any, you know, any buzz in it for me. And I wrote Tom for a week, and it's this pub crawl at the start of the book that I was writing. And I thought it seemed promising. He's a 29-year-old Irishman of literary ambition. And I know what that feels like. And he's a disaster. And he was lurching around town, and I felt the world building of Bute at that time was coming in kind of naturally into the narrative as he stumbled around the city. The second week I said, I'm going to try Polly. And I was more nervous because Polly Gillespie is a young American lady who's come from Chicago. So it's an American voice. But I started that second Monday morning writing her point of view. And after about 10 minutes, I said, I have a novel. I have the next novel, because she was just ready. She was ready to go for me, you know. And I knew at once she was the kind of the calm center of the book, the calm center that any novel needs to hold together. Tom wasn't going to hold anything together, but she could. And it felt to me like they were working as lovers. You know, writing a love story, you're on dangerous ground. You're on swampy ground straight away. It has to work out the way that it works out in life. They have to be right for each other. And I think Tom and Polly, for me, were working as this set of lovers, because he has no idea who he is. He's trying on different sort of images and different versions of himself all the time. Polly remarks at one point in the book he was trying on versions of himself as if they was jackets. Whereas she's fully certain of who she is. She knows who she is in her bones. She's very comfortable in her own skin. And they kind of finish each other off. They kind of complete each other. And they know that this is the great drama of their lives. And they don't know how it's going to last, long it's going to last for, and they know it's going to bring great danger, but they have no choice. They have to go with it and follow it.
Yeah, you say she's calm, and she certainly is calm compared to Tom, perhaps. But at the same time, you know, there's this rash deed, this deed that this elopement that they haven't really thought through, yeah. Right? And I like the epigraph to the book is I do not see any beauty in self-restraint, right? And apparently that was Mary MacLane, the wild woman of Bute, apparently.
Yeah,
right?
She was phenomenal. I think one of the things that frightened me away from my first attempt at the novel was I discovered a couple of Mary MacLane books. She was in Bute right around this time and wrote these crazy diaries, and they're incredible. They're written in this kind of almost Joycean kind of stream of consciousness, incredible language. And I thought, wow, I can't do Bute as well as it's been done 100 years ago. And I kind of kept away from him. She's been reissued in recent times by, I think, the New York Review of Books imprint. And she's really worth digging out, really interesting writer. But yeah, that quote, I do not believe in self-restraint, and nothing good can come out of it. Very much fitted with the characters, I think.
It does, yeah. And the passage you read about Tom going on this all-night bender. But of course it begins with Tom in his room saying to himself, no way he was going out tonight, right? I mean, so he always resolves that this is not going to happen, and then you know it's going to take it out for one little little drink.
He's also afraid of the dark. He believes himself to be a kind of a witch. He believes himself to be in touch with the occult. He believes in everything, you know. But he's kind of, I did feel like that he had sort of goodness in him as well. I felt there was light in him. He writes these letters and this was a job that existed. There were guys who went around the bars writing letters for minors to send to prospective wives, and a lot of them would have been illiterate, but not necessarily so. A lot just wouldn't have known what to say to a woman in a letter, just wouldn't have been comfortable with the idea of it. But Tom has a kind of a silver-tongued way and he can phrase it, and he knows how to put it politely. What's going on out here, and these in life, these women turned up in Butte on the basis of a few letters. Very often Irish women who had been working back east in Boston, New York in domestic service. And the deal was, come out here, I'm making $7 a day, you'll get a house, and they showed up and married these guys off the train, and it was, sometimes it worked out very well and at other times maybe not so well.
Yeah.
But it was it's crazy story.
Yeah. And Tom writes these letters, and but he actively thinks about the act of writing and composing, right? I mean, it's like what you need is discretion and imagination and editing, and he's very calculating in that sense.
He's always, it's remarked a couple of times that he's always seeing himself from above. He's seeing himself as a character in this story. He's self-mythologizing in the way the West has self-mythologized to invent itself as this kind of the last frontier. And it's significant that the couple meet for the first time in a photographic studio, because this was the period when the photo studios were opening on every main street. And for the very first time, very ordinary working class men and women were thinking about how they looked, and were thinking about their image and their clothes, and having portraits made and sending them back to their mother in Ireland or whatever, see how well I'm doing out in Butte. And Tom and Polly are very taken with the way they look together. They're kind of almost a kind of a Bonnie and Clyde pairing before their time, I guess. That's certainly one of the many influences that I took into the book. But yeah, so it's 1891 is a really interesting time to go in to a novel because of everything. It's the start of our world. It's the very beginning of our world, and it's a kind of it's a fascinating period to look at.
Yeah, and that self-conscious quality of Tom looking in the mirror and seeing himself, or the photo of looking how you come out in a photograph, the theatrical quality of the acting the character,
Absolutely, like a fundamental thing. He wants to be some sort of poet outlaw type figure. He's straight out of a Bob Dylan song way before his time, but it was I would say like the big influences on this book are probably cinematic more so than literary. As a teenager, when I was still living in Limerick City where I grew up, I got very into films and joined the local film societies and fancied myself as a cineast, and it was around that time I saw a lot of the great American kind of revisionist westerns of the 1970s, films like McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and a big influence. Terrence Malick's great kind of neo-westerns, Badlands and Days of Heaven, both of which have great female voiceovers holding the story together, from Sissy Spacek in Badlands and from the great late Linda Mance in Days of Heaven. And those voiceovers were very important for Polly's voice, the kind of blank poetry in them. The book owes a great deal to them. I didn't think about it very often in the intervening years between my attempts, but sometimes something would happen and I would think, and I remember when the great glorious television show Deadwood started to stream about 2006, maybe in Ireland it started to show, and I thought to myself, that's how I could have done my Butte, Montana novel, I loved the way language was used in that show. The show's creator, David Milch, a genius of a dialogue writer, used a kind of a Shakespearean Elizabethan register for a North Dakota town in the 1870s. And that's not how they necessarily spoke out there, but it felt right, And this kind of dialogue for your stories, it's a game you play by feel. Does it feel right? And that was a big inspiration in the book. Later on in my 20s, when I was trying to write fiction in a serious way for the first time, I was in Cork City at this time. And I certainly got very involved with Cormac McCarthy books for a while, which had the desperate effect of making a young man trying to write short stories in Cork City, Ireland, try to put wolves into his short stories. And there aren't many wolves anywhere around Cork City. But I did very briefly look back when I started to write this book. I came to a scene with a horse, and I know absolutely nothing about horses. And I thought I better refer to Mr. McCarthy in this situation. I went to my shelves and I took down, I think it was all the pretty horses that I found, and I opened it and read it 3 pages at random, and I thought, oh fuck, he knows a lot about horses. I'm really going to have to bone up on horses, you know. But then I thought, what if Tom Rourke knows nothing about horses? What if he's just completely winging it on the horse's front? I won't have to do any research. And that's what it's like actually novel writing on a day-to-day basis, is solving your little problems in as lazy a way as possible, and just going with the kind of the romance on the page, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. To come back to this notion of the language, right? I mean, that there is this great sense of the transformative nature of language, almost like when Tom, even in the most abject situations, these phrases come into his head, and he is transforming the sort of situation he finds himself in into he's trying to find a phrase that lifts it up, that makes it transcend
I think so. Yeah.
the depths that he finds
like
himself
like
in.
most of the book is written in the third person, but it's very close third. We go very close in to his consciousness, and it's a murky soup back there. But he has a gift. He has a linguistic gift. That might be the only thing that gets him out of this situation that he's in, you know. And it's that there's a kind of a slightly cheeky note in the book where he finds a cutting from a newspaper, the 12 rules for writing Western adventures. But it's really interesting. Westerns were being written very early on as the actual history of the West was unfolding. From the 1860s, really, Westerns are been written, and the Buffalo Bill circus show was going on and all that stuff. And the great kind of self-mythologizing of the West that went on. There's a great book, a non-fiction book by the late Jonathan Rabin, and it's called Badland: An American Romance, and it's about the settling of eastern Montana in the kind of very early 1900s. And it's really interesting the way it goes into the way the railroad companies really were making all these fictions of the West, trying to sell it to prospective settlers to come out, take on this terrible land that nobody could possibly make a living on it, but this is the last frontier. And it was very fictional, novelistic techniques that were being used to draw these people in. So the whole idea of the West is very much caught up in fiction, in its actuality as it was unfolding.
Yeah, so there's Tom's letter writing, which transforms the scruffy miners
And he's
into something more heroic,
elegant gentleman,
right? Yeah,
quite elegant and courteous and very clean, very clean gentleman.
Yes.
You know?
But also, but the Western, the rules for writing Westerns, he actually finds that in the pocket of one of the great villains of the,
He does,
doesn't he? Who then apparently also had some kind of aspirations for writing.
There are many in this book with really ambition, for sure.
Yeah, and then there's the Scottish journalist who's writing his own version of Pocatello and the town.
The great realization, actually, researching the book, was that at first I thought I could actually write this Western entirely in Irish accents, and it would be absolutely true to the place and the time. But it's also beautiful, such a fantastic multicultural stew of people and influences. You know, there was the Croat part of town, the Polish part of town. It was an amazing kind of, wherever there were mines in the world, people had come to Butte. The money was great by the standards of the time. They were getting quite wealthy, the miners, if they lived. Most of them didn't. But of course, they also fell into the bottle and often into the opium pipe to deal with the sheer physical pain of the work. But yeah, a crazy time. And when I was there in 1999, my last encounter in the town was very memorable. I was with the guy on my last morning. He was from kind of the local historical society, and he said, "By the way, you must have met Yank by now. Someone surely introduced you to Yank." And I said, "Who's Yank?" And he said, "Oh, come on." And he said, "I went to meet Yank Harrington, who was 99 years old, but still very sharp, living alone independently." and he came in, introduced to Yank, and he said, "Oh, I just had my flu shot this morning. I might manage to talk for 10, 15 minutes." And he gave me 4 hours. And he had been born in 1900 in Bute, to parents from County Cork. He had been brought back to Ireland when he was about 17 or 18, was back for about 10 years when the War of Independence was going on out on the Beara Peninsula. Then he moved back to Bute for the rest of his life, worked in a hotel, in the Finland Hotel, as a bellhop at some point. And before eventually I managed to escape out the door, the stories kept coming. He said, I gotta play some tunes. And he took down his fiddle and he played loads of old airs and reels. And I remember he played a Count John McCormack tune, Oh Believe Me If All Those Endearing Young Charms. And I could hear it every day I was writing this book. He eventually lived, he was about 103, I believe. He was a amazing guy. I thought of them often as I was writing it.
Yeah, Polly and Tom are kind of drawn together by the fact that they can have conversations. They can talk to each other, whether in actual words or in their heads. And Polly, her husband, who she's of course had never met before she married him off the train, he is a man of few words. She likes quips, she likes wordplay, and her husband doesn't. He just doesn't get it. He doesn't go there. And so
he also, I wanted to be careful with the portrait of poor Captain Harrington. I don't think he's a bad man, and she senses very quickly
there's no evil in his
there's no
eyes,
cruelty
right?
in him. He's just kind of you know, he's lost to his own kind of situation. But yeah, it was such fun writing the book. But what it felt more than anything for me was a great sort of nod to my younger self. I was saying this was a good world for you. You were on the right track, you know. The talents such as you have are perfect for this kind of a world. What I didn't know how to do in 1999 was how to reduce the material, the research material. I didn't know how to hide it on the page. Like I don't read a great amount of historical fiction, but I go back to some of the best. So I will read Hilary Mantel often. And if you read her great books about Thomas Cromwell, you can see the research on the page. It's all there. And it's what's given the story its depth and all that. But she knows how to cut it away. And I thought this novel had to be a very broad canvas when I tried to write it first. I thought I need to do the mines and the migration and the politics and the police and all of that. But when I came back to it 22 years later, I thought, no, this can be just about these two lovers on the run. And that's all it needs to be. And everything else will fall in behind that. But I would say Bute is a great study as well in terms of the Irish experience in North America, because it's a little Irish city in microcosm. And it's very interesting to see the way the Irish community organized themselves there. The first thing they did was open a lot of small businesses, little stores, and very often pubs in Trout, about 38 pubs. And from there, they very quickly took over the police apparatus of the city, and then very quickly took over the political apparatus of the city. And if you go back to Bute 10 years later in 1901, it's a little Irish machine town. It's like a Chicago or a Boston in miniature form, and it's a perfect study because it's so small and contained.
Yeah. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about Tom and Polly and where they came from, because they both have seemingly a dark past, which neither of them is willing to explore.
Yeah.
Don't talk to it about it to each other, but they also are unwilling to go back in their memory. There are hints at bad things
that they've been through bad
that
stuff.
they've been through really
we
bad
don't go into it.
Right. Yeah.
I think one of the reasons for that is I wanted to be true to the genre, and what a Western must have is propulsion. You have to jump up on your horse and light out for the territory, you know. And actually it was kind of I would say a response against my previous novel to this one, Night Boat to Tangier, which opens in the present moment, but you have these characters then who just go back into their past. And I kind of wanted to be different with this novel. I think what's nice and what's loving in these fictional lovers is that they both sense that there are things that the other doesn't want to go back to and is escaping really by being out in this crazy place and high in the Rocky Mountains, and they're delicate with each other in that way and tender with each other, I think.
Yeah, there's a sense that Polly is an orphan, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she's
Yeah,
sort
she has grown up in an orphanage
Yeah.
back in Chicago and
Um,
has been a bit of a tearaway. But we only get little slivers of it.
little snippets of it. Yeah.
And that that felt like the right decision.
Yeah, I think so too. It's
Yeah.
very you're left with this sense of you can't quite put your finger on it because she doesn't
Yeah.
want to go there. I think that's and but it also then gives you an understanding of why perhaps they are both why they're on this quest, which is not just to get to San Francisco or whatever they want to do. There's something greater. There's some sense of transcendence. They can't even put it into words, I think, but they talk about God, they talk about fate, they talk
Yeah.
about stories, they talk about the grand narrative, but
they're both roguish characters, I'd say, but they're thinking people as well. They're
Yeah.
thoughtful. And they do question what's around them and the roles that are being defined for them.
Yeah.
You know, and they're kind of inclined to question it. And does it have to be this way? Can we react against it?
Yeah. And of course, because it is this journey that they're on, they also meet characters along
Of
the way,
course.
which
is where the Western is very forgiving as a
Yes,
genre.
yes.
It gives you this, you know,
Yes.
when their characters are lighting out for the territory on a horse, they're going to have encounters, they're going to meet people. And I wanted to be careful with the descriptions of the people that they met. I didn't want it to be too just kind of drive by, you know, and I spent a lot of time actually with the subsidiary characters and kind of had a lot of fun with them.
Yeah, they're all incredibly memorable and very individual, right? There's the first two, the Jeannot and Maurras, the two métis, they meet.
Yes, great musicians.
Who the musicians who have the magic mushrooms.
They do have magic mushrooms. Métis were also known as being great fiddlers.
Right. Yeah.
They meet a reverend from Yorkshire. They're a Cornish gentleman. I did do the audiobook. I do all my own audiobooks, and I can manage the Irish accents, and I can make a go at characters like Ding Dong, and I could do Yorkshire. My Cornish isn't good, but you have to try. You have to lean into it and try. But it's funny, you know, and I think it's true of a lot of Irish writing, and it's also true of a lot of writing from the American South, that often we write stories that are ultimately written to be heard, you know, that work on the air. It's just in us, this kind of lyric impulse that can be dangerous ground to find yourself on. But there is a yarn spinning nature that comes naturally into Irish writing. One thing a writer should never do is go on to goodreads.com to look at what people are saying in the books. So I was on it the other day to see what they were making in my new novel, and someone gave me 5 stars and described Barry's grandiose campfire storytelling style. And I thought that kind of gets me. In real, I do believe in that. I do believe I love a novel to feel like some old guy coming up to you some night in the bar going, "Come here, listen.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this? Is all true." You
Yeah.
know, I love that feeling. I just looked at the clock. Should we open it up to a few questions, maybe, if we have time, and
By all means.
if there are any? Hi, how's it going?
Said that there was more of a cinematic than a literary.
Oh, I'm talking to them all already. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've been writing screenplays for over a number of years now. For the last novel, Night Boat to Tangier, and for my first published novel, City of Bohane. They're both in advanced kind of stages of development that can go on for years and many years. I had a feature film made of short stories called Dark Lies the Island, a small independent Irish film. I really enjoy it, writing screenplays. It's a good proportion of my income. Technically, it's kind of interesting. You feel like you're at about 80% of capacity compared to writing prose fiction. There are more rules, you know. But I like the sociable element of it. I like having meetings on Zoom with colleagues, because writing novels is long and lonely. And I kind of at some level still miss my journalistic days, which is very sociable. You're going out in the world talking to people, and it's very important that writers keep going out into the world talking to people, because that's where you find it, your stuff. Thanks. Hi.
I was backpacking in County Cork, right?
Oh, okay.
And your night boat 10 years had just gone. So I went to check it out, and it was wonderful.
Thank you.
One thing I noticed in all your writings is you really, Cork is very important to you.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, it's.
Trying to describe Cork, and you trying to discover Cork.
Do you know what it is? I spent I arrived in Cork first at the age of 23, and I was gone by kind of 31. So not a great deal of time, 8 years. But it feels to me like a place of literary discovery, which is what it was for me. I realized that what I had to do was write fiction. That's what I needed to do. I was doing fine as a freelance journalist. I was paying the rent, but I knew I wanted to make it all up. I knew I wanted to invent. And the first place things started to work out for me on the page was in Cork, and with Cork accents. And it felt like this is the key, this is the way into me. And I still go back to it, in my fiction, quite a lot. For the last 17 years now, I've lived in County Sligo in the northwest, and slowly but surely, as José said, that's become more and more a setting for my stories. The work has been drawn to the northwest. And what's really interesting about Ireland as an island, for a relatively small island, the mood and the atmosphere and the talk and the humor changes very quickly and within relatively small distances. The northwest is incredibly different from the southwest. The southwest is very talkative and chatty and hysterical, and the talk is 100 miles an hour like that while I'm from a Limerick, and there's crazy surreal humor. And then County Sligo in the northwest, 2 hours up the road, very deadpan. I call it the land of the pregnant pause, and you can't tell if they're making fun of you or not. And it's kind of, and it's really, really different. And it's like that. Go a couple of miles down the road and it can change again. And it's kind of a very kind of under-remarked resource for a writer, the way it changes like that. But yeah, Cork always feels to me, and when I go back there now, as I do often to the city, it feels like a place of literary discovery for me. Thanks. Hi.
And are you planning on going there on this book tour, and how do you expect to be greeted? Or
I'm not going back to Butte, Montana on this tour. When I started to write it again in 21, I said, okay, I got to go back out to Butte now and refresh my research. But then I thought, you know what? I don't need to. I have it all. And because I had done it so long ago, it had kind of naturally an elegiacal feel for me or something. It was like I was remembering the city as if I had lived there myself in some way. There have been several Butte readers already onto me, and they seem to be very happy with the whole thing. And I'm getting so many Butte stories into my email inbox. Roddy Doyle, a friend of mine, great Irish writer, emailed me that literally the day after the book came out, said, my great grandmother's sister ran a saloon in Butte. In the 1920s, a friend from Cork City was on to me, said, my great-great-granduncle was the doctor there in 1910, but then he was accused of murder and disappeared to Alaska. And there are so many links, back and forth the whole time on this whole migration. Yeah, thanks. Hi.
Lots of characters through your short stories, and rogues and star-crossed lovers and whatnot. Do these characters continue to reside? And do you ever think, oh, what happened to the story of Meek?
Right. Okay. Mostly you write them out of your head and you manage to get rid of them, and it's kind of a nice thing. Like, actually, it's interesting. This is my seventh book of fiction, and it's long enough. I can see myself changing as a writer over that period. I think very early I was mostly interested in kind of language and style, and what I could do with the sentence on the page. And I'm still very interested and devoted to those elements. But I think now as well, probably most important for me are the characters, are the people. And I really reside with them when I'm writing the book. For the 10 or 11 months I was on this, I was Tom and Polly all the time, you know, to the point actually where I really missed them when they were gone from my desk. I was kind of sad for a while. But some characters recur for years and you don't know what to do with them because they haven't found their stage yet. I had these two Corkonian gangsters called Morris and Charlie for many years, showing up in short stories, and they would immediately destroy the short story because they were too large as characters. And I eventually thought, oh God, I have to give them their own story. And I set it in Spain, which I knew well because I go to Spain a lot and have done for years. And it's like you hear a tuning fork when the characters find their stage. You know, that's the magic kind of moment when you know where it's set. When you have the people and the landscape together, you're away. But sometimes there are certain characters and stories you think about and you think there's more there. I could write more there. But I have an awful phobia, almost a fear of repeating myself, of going back and doing the same trick again in some way. At one point, I did promise publishers a follow-up to the City of Bohane novel, and I got to a Monday morning where I sat down to start it, and after about an hour, I said, "Nah, I could do it, but I wouldn't be excited. You know, I could sit here for a year and do a very reasonable facsimile of that first book, but there wouldn't be the same excitement in it for me, and that would transmit, I think. That would come across. You have to be having a good time with the thing. One more. The gentleman just behind there. So with City of Bohane, you know, I had to revisit it very recently. But there was an American university class in California somewhere. God bless them, looking at it, and they got me on a Zoom and they asked me to read bits, and they were pages that I hadn't read since I wrote them, almost in 2009 or 2010. And it's like visiting a distant cousin of yourself when you read old work. You've changed a lot as a person. I could sense great vitality and excitement in the language. I knew I was using a kind of language that hadn't come into Irish writing very much, which is the working class language of Limerick and Cork, the cities that I grew up in. And I could sense that. I also sensed that it was very much a first novel in terms of kind of structural engineering, you know. What I think is very important in a novel is a kind of balance of wildness and control. If it really is going to represent life, there has to be a looseness or a wildness or an unpredictability in it, because life is like that. It hovers out of control for us all the time. But there also has to be that control as a writer, as a novelist. You have to be shaping and guiding the narrative. Going back to it as an older writer with more experience, I felt I had maybe let some of the looseness in that novel take over a bit. My excitement in the language took over a bit to the point where some great characters in that book weren't developed enough. I thought, going back and reading it now, but I'm still very fond of it. And it's people still write me letters about it 14, 15 years after it came out, which is a lovely thing. But thanks so much, and thanks to José. It's been lovely. Thanks a lot.